Model deployment is simply the engineering task of exposing an ML model to real use. The term is often used quite synonymously with making model available via real-time APIs. Building a model is generally not the end of the project. In this model deployment tutorial, you will learn about one of the web frameworks used by Python called Flask. Further, you will understand how one can do machine learning model deployment using Flask, and finally, how model deployment takes place using Heroku. So let's get ready to understand the real application of machine learning, which is model deployment. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any new update or video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoyed this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, so make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. Make sure to comment on the video for any query or suggestions, and I will respond to your comments.
Alright guys, coming to introduction to web frameworks. Now, web frameworks are these really powerful entities which we've been using the products of for a really long time, I can assure you that. Now, to give you an overview of where you might have been in a situation where you've used the product built out of a web framework, let's just think of a situation where, you may be swiping on your Instagram, you're taking a break from work, you're relaxing, and you're just trying to open the application Instagram, you're trying to swipe, you're trying to refresh, you're trying to watch reels, you're doing a lot of these things, right? Now, if you've ever been very observant with any of these social media sites like Snapchat, Facebook or Instagram or anything, it's reactive to what you do, right? It will generate content or it will showcase content in an order based on your activity in the app, based on what you like, based on, it'll not show you things that you're not really into, right? If you love reading books and you keep searching books on Instagram, for some reason it will only start recommending books to you, right? It's not going to recommend some horror documentary for you to like see posts of facts and anything like that. No, it doesn't happen. It might happen in one or two cases where Instagram is trying to check if you'd be interested in that. But at the end of the day, Instagram as an application, it's not static. It's not just one page or one feed that it is showing the entire world. Impossible, right? Even though it's the same content. Let's just say that there's a celebrity who posted something. Of course, it's going to be the same for anyone watching through the Instagram app anywhere across the world. But at the end of the day, how it is served to you, how you actually get to see it on your phone, and how Instagram basically decided to show you the content is going to be very, very different, right? Sometimes it might recommend it. There are other times where someone might have shared it to you. There's many ways, and you have to understand that in the back end, for this to work, for something to be dynamic, for something to be actually analyzing and assessing what you're doing and then reciprocate to that and then add value to that, right? That's how these social media sites become really engaging. We sort of feel very comfortable on social media because of this exact fact, that whatever you are doing, it feels like you're talking to a computer, you're working on your phone. There are many intelligent AI-based bots, and there are again technologies like web frameworks and a lot more which are making your experience feel so personalized and feel so really well that you would love to do more of it, right? Now, think about the technical aspect of all of everything that I've just said. All the data that Instagram has to show you or any other app, for example, it has to retrieve everything from servers which are stored around the world, and eventually it'll have to query these servers for data. It'll have to receive certain data. It has to show you the data. Now you will go on to interact with the app. You're texting a friend, you're sending memes, whatnot, right? So it has to take all these data back and update it back in the databases to see what your activity is, what you're doing and whatnot, right? Now this becomes really important for you to understand, because implementing a concept such as these is what the challenge of web frameworks actually solved for us. There was a time when we had a very split division between static websites and dynamic websites. Static websites, regardless of what you would do, it had its own set of code and it would work only one single way for anyone in the entire world. Dynamic websites, however, are very different. They can be reactive and they can focus on customizing your own experience with respect to the brand, the product, e-commerce site, whatever it is that you're using, right? You'll be surprised to know that even if you're not a shopper, even if you don't consider yourself to be a person who shops on the internet, you will be very curious to understand that there are almost everyone in the entire world out there who are trying to offer products or services that they use web frameworks out there, right? Now, the most important thing was this question, right? What if your Instagram app or any other app could never do any sort of real-time processing or real-time data retrieval? It would be really boring, right? Maybe if I post something on my Instagram today and you get to see it tomorrow morning because the servers had to upgrade overnight or something like that, it wouldn't make real sense. I mean, of course, it has its own vibe and all of that, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't make sense, right? But what you have to also understand is that that approach where things are static, right? When things are static, they work really quick and they are a lot simpler to not just build and create, but to maintain and manage later down the line as well, right? It actually is very simple. It actually is very fast to work with. But the downside is that you lose a lot of personalization and you lose a lot of features, a lot of almost real time or actually real time features, which again do not make sense, especially if you're a person who likes to watch cricket or anything on your mobile phone. And imagine that there's like a 1 hour delay between the actual match and your phone. Do you think you'd still be interested and you'd be all hyped up? Not really, right? You'll definitely move to another application which might do things quicker than these ones. So even though in certain cases web frameworks are associated to being actually slower, but you have to understand that there is so much complexity that's going on in the background to retrieve multiple points of data across multiple sources and eventually bring it back, retrieve it. And it's not just it's bringing the data back to the client side and it's just holding it there, right? It has to serve the data to you in a right way. So there has to be logic written to ensure that the data gets served to you, not just served to you, but served to you in a way that makes it correct, right? It's not like it's just throwing random database queries at you and saying, hey, here's the photo that you wanted. Not really. It doesn't work like that, right? Now, one really important thing that everyone has to understand about the world of web frameworks is that whenever you talk about web frameworks, there is usually two big divisions, right? Every web application ecosystem in the entire world has two sides. It's called as a client-server architecture. You might have heard of it, where a lot of processing happens on the server side and only the information that's required by each of these individual clients. Basically, what happens is that these clients keep pinging one common server, right? There can be 100 clients, there can be 1,000 clients. Now, for a fact, you might know that there are millions of users, right? In fact, I think Facebook had a couple of billions of users or something. So they cannot have one server for everyone. They cannot have a billion server around the world and you cannot get your own customized server where all your data is stored. Not really, right? So a mass of people connect to one particular server, and with these big companies, it is never one server. They usually have one or two servers in every city with almost every countries around the world. So it is diversified, but not to a point where each of us get our own servers, right? That hasn't happened yet. Now, an important thing you have to understand about client side and server side functionality is for the fact that it is very different. A server is a very powerful machine which has the capability to not just serve one person. It has the computing power, it has the processing power, and at the end of the day, it has the capability to serve a lot more people, right? So what happens on the client side is very simple. Whenever there is any sort of interaction that the client does, when I say a client, it is basically you sitting, wherever it is that you're watching this particular course right now, you are a client because the video that you're watching right now is stored in a server and it is being fed to you. It is being served to you like how food would be served in a restaurant, right? Think about it that way. So what happens is that the code gets executed on the user's browser, and in your case, the browser might be Chrome, Firefox, or whatever it is, and it gives you a user interface, right? Now, wherever you're watching this course, there is a user interface around you. You would have come to our website to actually go on to watch this particular course, right? Great Learning Academy. Similarly, all the data of Great Learning Academy is impossible to be stored on your laptop, my laptop, or hundreds of laptops because we have a ton of content, right? Now, all that content is basically stored on our server, and a lot of magic has to happen on the server side as well. When you take a look at it, your client just asks questions and it gets all the answers from the server. Now, to ask questions and get answers, there is one step in the middle which is missing, which is basically processing, right? Which is basically your whatever questions you ask, there has to be some sort of thinking, there has to be some sort of analytical application that is going on in the background, in the back end, to attach logic to your question and eventually serve you with a particular answer. Now, all the data that the client requires can actually be stored on the server. Any and every data that is required to design the system, that is required to build your application, that is required to host your application, and even to the capability of you testing your application. everything that's needed for everything that I just said will be stored on the server. Now, there are multiple softwares called middlewares wherein, your client side will have a capability to talk to your server side very easily. It's not as easy as connecting one wire and be done with it. Well, in today's world of internet, it actually is. But at the end of the day, there's a lot more complexity that goes on in the background. But what you should know at this moment is whenever you're trying to use a web application, you have to understand that whatever you're doing, you're as a client, and every single interaction that you do can actually be recorded, and your behavior, your analysis, the products that you buy, the way in which you buy, every minute thing can be in detail assessed, because all your data can get stored on the servers as well. And of course, the server is not just trying to save your data, right? It's not trying to steal your data or anything as such. It's just trying to do it to probably help you better, make better recommendations or anything, be it on Amazon, be it on Netflix, be it anywhere across, right? So it becomes very, very important for you to know. If that's the case, then what is the definition? What is the actual definition of what a web framework would be? Well, a web framework is basically a collection of various tools, guys. We consider it to be an architecture because at the end of the day, it provides you a ton of tools. It's not just one tool that you go about using. It's not just one technique that you're using here. It's a variety of technique, variety of libraries, and there's so many things that you're given, right? Think of it like a bag of goodies, bag of gifts for a developer that you can actually use to develop your application, right? Now, everything that you would require to build and maintain even extremely large online applications, it's actually all the core functionality is provided by these web frameworks. All you have to do is you have to build your own logic on top of it, add your own flavor to whatever product that it is that you're offering, and eventually get it out there, right? Now, you might be asking a question at this moment of time saying, hey, if everyone is just building their own products, they can just do it in their own ways. Why do you even require a framework to go about doing it? One really important thing as a developer, as a programmer, or as a web developer, you have to understand that writing a web application is not really simple. It is an extremely complex task. Now, usually there's a lot of code whenever the term complex is thrown around in the world of information technology, right? So what happens here is that the advantage that web frameworks provide to you is they're like these helpers which will make sure that you write a small amount of code. You writing this much code will have this big of an impact overall, right? That is again one of the really big reasons of why you would want to consider it. If you are a programmer and if you're trying to solve an application, if one guy can do it in 100 lines with the use of a web framework, the other guy has to write 2,500 lines of Python code. Which guy would you prefer to be? A simple question, right? So code reusability, you write the code once and you use it multiple times anywhere you require. And this kind of an approach not just makes your task as a programmer or as a developer faster, but for the actual program itself that it is running, since the code becomes small and it knows that it has to reuse certain parts of it, think of efficiency and think of how fast the website or the web app will be able to run now, because it doesn't have to do a lot of processing, right? I'll give you a simple example. This turns me down a lot, but let me know your opinion. Whenever you try to open a web application, whenever you go on to try to, open something, let's say such as Netflix or Prime or anything, just giving you a hypothetical example. If these websites, right, they load lightning fast, let's just be honest with each other. It's never that they are the bottleneck, right? If something is slow, 90% of the time we say, hey, our internet might be busted or something like that. But when you think about it, if these websites were really slow, let's just say I open this website right now and it probably takes even somewhere around 30-35 seconds to open, right? It's not really a lot. 30 seconds is not a lot of time. But at the end of the day, if you actually understand and analyze it, we are so used to having really fast internet and really fast technologies around us, where waiting for 30 seconds to open a website, that website will lose the customer's business, right? Because there's someone else where you type in the name, hit enter, boom, their website is ready for you to see. Even a matter of 30 seconds. Now, my entire sentence lasted 30 seconds here, and you probably didn't think that 30 seconds is a lot of time, but loading times, if they are shorter, they lead to increase in revenues worth in millions of dollars. And if your loading time becomes high or something is fishy, something is not right, that will just tank your entire company's wealth. It has happened in many cases. You can actually Google about it. There are a lot of companies who have lost a ton of business, billions of dollars worth of business, just because of the fact that, there's a client who went to a competitor because something was slow, something was not right with their web application or whatever it is, right? It is that critical. So code reusability becomes a very, very important part of it. Now, an important part that you have to understand about web frameworks is that it does involve a lot of coding, right? Now, when you have to create an entire backend, when you have to create an entire server and ensures that it provides everything that is needed for the application to run, you require some sort of a server-side language. It's called a scripting language or whatever it is, where you have to sit and code the server. You have to teach the server what it has to do and how it has to be able to serve these clients, right? Now, one advantage that you get with web frameworks is that Python is, again, one of the world's most popular programming languages that we have today, and it is providing you complete support to be used with respect to frameworks such as Django and frameworks such as Flask for this exact purpose. So you're already taking a very complex process and simplifying it using web frameworks. Now I'm telling you, hey, you can further simplify the usage of this web framework with an easy to use programming language such as Python to help you completely get up and get started with whatever application that it is that you're designing. I don't think anyone would say no to that, right? Because that at the end of the day is the entire essence of how you can simplify something really complex and yet at the same time create a beautiful application or a beautiful solution to a problem using that. Right? Fantastic, guys. So that was the introduction to web frameworks. In this next section, we're going to take a look at the introduction to Flask. Now, Flask as a library on its own is a beautiful framework to work with. The best part about Flask, now, I know that some of you all are thinking, oh, so Flask can do a lot. So it must be a very heavy framework to learn. It must be really complex. It must be very hard and all of that. Well, to your surprise, I can actually tell you that Flask is a very lightweight framework that has the capability to in fact, it provides a wide variety of tools and techniques through which you can use to build any application that you want. Now, some of you all might be thinking, oh, can we only build really small applications, or how is it? Well, you can build an application as small as you want or an application as large as you want. As long as you have the hardware to support everything that you're building, Flask will always be there to ensure that you can do something faster, better. And the best part is you can do all of it in an easier manner, right? So, how is Flask so lightweight? A web framework has to be very heavy and dense because it consists of so many things. The advantage that Flask has is that its entire core functionality becomes light because of the fact that it depends on two other libraries to help it work, right? It's not like Flask is working standalone. Flask asks the help of two other external libraries. It's called Jinja2 or Jinga2, however you want to call it, and it uses a template, and there's something else called as the Worksug WSGI toolkit to function. As you can see, it requires the power of a templating tool and it requires the power of a toolkit to actually complete its own architecture, its own cycle of usage, and eventually through these we make a lot of sense, and we at the end of the day have a lot of capabilities to build tasks easily, right? Now, I know for a fact that all of you guys are saying like, okay, so what is WSGI, Worksug, Jinja2? Like, you've never heard of it probably, and you might be very, very confused at this moment to see these new fancy letters and terms. Well, let me tell you that WSGI basically stands for a web server gateway interface. Now, what it is used as is basically a standard. It is used as a standard for the creation between an interface that exists between your actual server and your web application. Now, again, let me quickly take you back to that Instagram example. Every time you open Instagram, do you see a bunch of code? Do you see a lot of servers? Do you see a lot of databases? Not really. You actually see a web application, and all that data it is getting, everything is happening in the background, right? Whatever you see is what the app wants you to see as a user interface, but there has to be an interface which brings data from the server to your application, and that is what WSGI is actually responsible for. Right? Fantastic. Now, the next key term that you would have not heard is Worksug. Worksug basically is a toolkit that is used to implement the concept of request and response and many other utility functions as well. Now, this becomes a foundational concept because let me tell you this, when you open Instagram and let's just say you're trying to stalk your best friend or someone, you have to enter their name and hit search. So basically what you're saying is, hey Instagram, I request you to basically show me the details of this person. You send a request to the server saying, hey, I need the details of this person. And what does the server say? If you are authorized, if you follow that person, if that person has a private profile, whatever it is, if everything is all right, the server will say, hey, thank you for your request, here is my response, now here is this person's profile, sit and stalk till you are happy, something like that, right? So when you have the capability to actually tell the server that I'm requesting something and to get something from the server as a response back and many other utility tasks, Worksuite is very critical in that as a library, right? And then we have Ginger 2. Ginger 2 basically is a templating engine that's built for Python. Now, whenever you say a templating engine, think about this, right? Whenever you hit refresh on a web page, whenever you move to another web page in a website, or whatever tasks that you do on YouTube or wherever it is, you will see that every time you try to do something, most of the elements there will have to be re-rendered, right? It's very simple. Go to YouTube right now, keep hitting refresh multiple times. The entire interface of YouTube will not refresh, right? It's only those videos which are refreshing. Everything else is remaining constant because you're not trying to refresh the entire architecture of YouTube there. You're just trying to refresh the videos that YouTube has to show to you. So there's a bit of static and there's a bit of dynamic flavor that's present in the web application there. And all of these usually happen whenever you make use of templating engines, and Ginger 2 is beautiful at doing that, especially if you are working with Flask, right? So I hope with this slide you're very clear about these very three terms which might seem really funky to a beginner, because trust me, when back in the day when I had to learn these terms and when I saw this for the first time as well, even I was wondering, well, whoa, what is WSGI? Why have I never heard of it, right? Well, you don't have to face any of that right now because you guys know what all of these are. So the next question one might be asking is saying, okay, so for what tasks would you go on to use Flask? There are many tasks. When you say building a web application, you can work on supporting secure cookies. Your cookies don't have to be, unsecure anymore. You have to, if you understand the importance of cookies, you will know how important this first point is. Now, whenever there is any sort of situation wherein there is a requirement for fast debugging, you create an application and you have to take it live. Before you take it live, what do? It goes through rigorous amount of testing, right? Now, testing is a process on its own and debugging is another headache of its own. A web framework is considered very good if it can provide you fantastic methods to not only just build your application, but at the same time provide you ways of how you can debug this application, right? Let's be very honest here, even the most really talented and really amazing programmers among us, we make a small amount of mistakes every now and then, right? Every time you run a code, it is going to throw you some error. It's going to be a very silly error or it's going to be a very complex error, but you do get that error and you have to solve it. You have to fix it. How is the web development framework helping you solve that? Well, Flask seems to be doing it at a really good pace. Third point says Ginger 2 templating. We already took a look at Ginger 2 templating and we understand what it does in terms of rendering these dynamic web pages for us. And whenever you have a client or whenever you have a requirement that says, hey, the web application I want to build, I want to take a modular approach to building this tool. It's not like there is an all hands collaboration. Everyone is just working on it haphazardly and one day you have no product and 3 days later you have an entire product ready. No, it doesn't happen like that, right? Anywhere across the world, across any domains, what happens is that you have a very structured way of taking it really slow, breaking a huge complex problem down into what? Into really smaller chunks of problems and trying to attack them, trying to solve those. And eventually once you start solving all these tiny problems, it will lead to a very big solution wherein you have solved the overall problem that was at hand, right? That's a modular approach you take to designing your web application. I made it sound very simple at this moment of time, but understand that when you are designing an app yourself, you are going to require support from a web framework that provides this modular approach, and it's a very important point that you guys have to understand. There are concepts wherein you can have an API, an application programming interface, basically wherein you can work with a website and you can give a lot of functionality to your customers, to your people, to your prospect who are coming to your website, right? So think about a situation wherein there are new people who are coming onto your website, and let's just say you're an e-commerce website or something like that. What is the first thing that you would suggest? Of course, you show your website, show all the products. The next thing that you would do is you would get them to create an account for themselves, right? Wherein they can track all the orders that they have made. You can take a very detailed look at your own self, your own profile, and it's basically giving you importance in that particular product. You can implement all of that easily with respect to Flask. And whenever you provide the concept of logging in and logging out, users will have to register, right? It's not like anyone else can log into anyone else's account. It wouldn't make any sense if that was the case. So for logging in and logging out, you're going to have to be registered, and to be registered, you get your user ID, you get your password. If there's a profile section, you can go on to set a lot of things in your profile, and you can do a lot of things basically, right? That capability, where do you think it comes from? It comes from all of these parts where you're constructing an API for a web application, right? And whenever you think about providing any sort of additional functionality for registered users, now if I just go to a website such as Amazon right now, the web app is still being served to me. But maybe if I log in, there are different things that will be shown. Now, if I just go to their website, if I open it in incognito mode, there's not a lot of things that it's going to basically, you will not be allowed to do a lot, right? I don't think you can probably buy a product without creating an account. I'm not really sure on that. But there are certain advantages of having a registration, right? So, be it in terms of you as a customer using it, or be it in terms of a person who has actually provided you the web application, trust me, it makes it easier for both the parties that's involved, right? Fantastic. Now, there are certain prerequisites to learning and using Flask, and there are two really important prerequisites. The first really important prerequisite sits with the fact that you have to have working knowledge of Python, right? Now, Flask is a web framework that is popularly used in a programming language like Python. So if you are brilliant at Flask, but yet if you cannot implement it in Python, that would be slightly problematic, right? So you're going to have some sort of basic understanding in Python, and then you get to start working on libraries. So for this course, do not worry if you do not have any previous experiences with Python or Flask. It is actually sort of okay, because at the end of the day, we're not really seeing a lot of code, or I'm not walking you through a web application at the moment. So the goal here is to get you guys comfortable with Flask, right? Now, take a look at the second prerequisite. The second prerequisite says you require hands-on experience with HTML. Yes, this is definitely a requirement. Now, whenever you're working with web applications, whenever you're working with websites, HTML is 99% of the time the foundation that the entire website gets to be built on, the entire skeleton for the website. So it really becomes important that you understand this, because again, down the line through the course, you will see that this is actually a very important requirement out there. Right? So guys, with this, we have completed our introduction to web frameworks. We know a good bit about them, and we have had an introduction to Flask, and we understand a good amount of Flask as well. Coming to a section where we will be discussing how you can install Flask, it's actually very simple, guys. I have only one slide to show you guys to install Flask, because it's really that simple. First step is you have to have Python in your machine, right? So make sure that you get the latest version of Python installed for whatever operating system that you have. You should know at this moment that Python almost supports almost every single operating system that's out there. So install the latest version which is required for you, and then you're going to require something called as an integrated development environment. It stands for an IDE in short. Something like Sublime Text, something like PyCharm, Visual Studio Code, Google Colab, whatever it is, right? You can have an environment where you write Python code, and once you've set that up, you have to create something called as a virtual environment in your project. Here's where things gets interesting. The way that Flask works, right? And the way that Python talks to Flask and your overall thing has to be involved. You're not just using Flask and Python here. You'll be using a browser. You would have had a server. You'll be using the server client architecture that I just told you. If you do not create a small virtual environment for the code to work in, any changes that you might actually make will interfere with the operating system itself. Yes, that's the reason we create a virtual environment where any changes that you make is bound only to those that particular environment. It doesn't affect or hurt anything in your real operating system, and I think it's very important for all of you all to work with that, right? So you have to create a virtual environment to basically install Flask. It's one simple command: pip install Flask. You would already know at this moment of time, if you've used Python, that pip stands for pip installs packages, or it's a package manager that comes bundled with many operating systems that's out there, and one single command will basically help you set up and install this entire web application framework. And to check if you have actually basically installed it correctly and all of that, here's a small piece of code. You can find it in the official documentation as well. You have to just run that piece of code, and if it works fine without giving you an error, you have Flask ready, right? Now this simple application, all we're trying to do is we're importing the library, we're creating a small app, we have a root which says which consists of a function, right? We're not trying to create multiple web pages. We have just one page which shows us hello world. So every time this is created and it is running, it's a constant thing. It's a server that has to run in the background, right? And you can look at this here at the bottom. It says, hey, I am running the server on this particular web page or this particular IP address, right? So all you have to do is it's basically self-reference. 127.0.0.1 is basically local reference that it provides, and if you just click on that, it will take you to a web page where it prints hello world or whatever it is that you're trying to return with your hello world function, right? So one simple piece of code, again 3 or 4 lines piece of code, extremely simple. And if you have your Flask set up really correctly, all it takes is you to run this piece of code, get your server set up, and eventually after you've run your setup, you have to understand that it's a server client architecture, right? When you open this website, you become the client, but on the back end the server should be still running to show you that hello world, right? So this is a constant thing that keeps running and keeps running and keeps running. And when you decide saying that, hey, okay, I'm done seeing hello world on my web page, and you want to stop your server, you just get to stop this piece of code and it'll work, right? So guys, again, as I just told you, 2 simple slides of how you can install Flask and get away with it. Now we'll come to a quick section where we'll try to understand a little bit about Flask. One important question you have to always think about Flask or any other web development framework is how easy is it for you as a developer to go about performing tasks such as debugging. Debugging is very, very important, as we have already discussed at this moment of time. And whenever you have executed a sample piece of code, right, the development server that you're basically working on, it will not work in debug mode. It will be working in production mode. It will be actually thinking that you have your app ready and ready to function. When you are saying, hey, this is not ready for launch, I'm trying to debug it, you actually activate something called debug mode. And activating debug mode does a lot of things for you. The most important thing is it enables automatic reloading. Now, whenever you do any sort of changes to the code, as soon as you come to your client side, you open the web page, it is ready for you to see. You don't have to rerun the code. You don't have to do a lot of different things. You don't have to keep refreshing it 100 times for every single change that you do. That has to be really advantageous, right? Automatic reload. You change something in the code, open your client, boom, changes are shown. This is hugely advantageous. You know, that huge, if I could just say, if I could put it in caps on the screen, trust me, I would. Now, what it also does is activate something called as the Python debugger. And as you already might know, Python debugger is very critical when you're working with Python, because it will give you a chance to take a look at what is happening. There's a concept called variable explorer, wherein you can understand what happens to what value stored in what address for what variable at what point of time. That's such a complex sentence that I just said, but the level of depth you can go to check what your variables are doing is only possible because of the fact that you have the Python debugger there, right? Now, how do you get into the debugging mode? That will be a very important question you're asking. And again, if you are running your server right now, and if you're just happily printing hello world, all you have to do is stop the server, run this piece of code in Python, flask_env equal to development flask run. All you're trying to say is, hey, we are going to the debug mode right now, and you can bring all the advantages of debugging that Flask provides, along with the feature of automatic reloading as well. That is debugging in Flask. The next thing is using HTML templates. Now, that hello world thing that you would have printed, and if you haven't done it, I really recommend that you pause this course, install Flask, and it takes 5-10 minutes at max for you guys to actually go on to print that hello world to make sure you guys are set up. Right now, when you have a simple application such as that, which is displaying only one simple message, you're not really using any sort of HTML attributes out there. But do you see a hello world every time you open Instagram? Not really, right? You see a lot of complex stuff, and all of these complex stuff that's being served to you basically uses the concept of HTML to display the information in many cases as well. There's a helper function that Flask provides. It's called render_template, and this function just talks to the entire Ginger 2 template engine, and it brings forth this capability for you to display any information that you want and serve it in the form of an HTML file. Now, the biggest advantage that happens whenever you're doing that is for the fact that you can write HTML code and you can save it in .html file, and you can use this .html file to not just write the skeleton of your web application, but you can write a bit of functionality. You can add maybe 1 or 2 bits of logic there as well. That is how important HTML is to Flask. And alongside debugging and alongside HTML, you can already see that Flask is actually punching way above its weight in terms of the capabilities that it is providing to you, right? And then the next thing is setting up a database. Now, ladies and gentlemen, be it Flask, be it Django, be it any web application development in the entire world out there, your data has to be stored somewhere. It's very easy to say that, hey, you just throw your data in a server. What do you mean by that? Your server is not only providing compute capabilities, but it is also giving methodologies to store data in a structured manner. So a database will give you the capability to store almost all kinds of data that's being used by the application. You can have something called a structured query language. You can have these SQL and NoSQL databases through which you can integrate it, maybe something like SQLite or something, and eventually interact with the database easily. You require any data at any moment of time, you get it, right? That's how simple it should be. And one more important thing which goes unsaid, especially if you're a beginner, is you have to understand in your database, the data gets stored as rows and columns. The database does not look like Instagram, right? From the database, you pick up data, you transform that data, you convert the data from one format to another, and then it gets to look like an Instagram picture. You get it? So converting that rows and columns worth of data to make sure that it looks like what it is supposed to look is a conversion task that has to happen, that involves logic and processing, and there as well your server plays a critical role. Right? So that was a little bit of a hint for you guys to understand, to take a deep dive into understanding certain important capabilities such as debugging, database handling, and whatnot with respect to Flask. Now we come to a very, very interesting section where we can compare somewhere around 4 or 5 points of why Flask or maybe why Django can be better in many, many ways, right? Now, let me be honest with you guys. I have used both Flask and Django for a really long time. And at this moment of time, I can tell you for a fact that Flask does some things really, really well. And Django does some things, again, in a very different way, but beautifully well, right? So it's like comparing almost apples and oranges, but if apples and oranges were to taste the exact same way but look different, I think it would be a very good comparison to wrap up our entire comparison between Flask and Django, right? Well, of course, that's not the case. So let's quickly take a look at a small yet very simple comparison between Flask and Django. The first point that we're going to be discussing is handling admin related tasks in the backend. If you are a person, if you are learning this course, you want to use Flask somewhere down the line, you want to make sure you're the admin and you're trying to build something, right? So what sort of capabilities is Flask providing you here where it may or may not be disadvantageous to that Django? Well, in this particular case, Flask does not actually provide any sort of direct admin related features, but Django does provide certain features to help you get started really quick. Now, do not jump ship at this moment of time thinking, oh, Django is providing admin facilities, let me just move there directly. Flask does not do what Django does inherently, but there is addable functionality to Flask which will eventually get you to do something very, very similar to this. Just that you will have to take a bit of extra time and you will have to spend some time not just creating the logic for that, but ensuring that logic talks to your already existing application. That is it. That one step gives Django a little bit of an advantage in terms of Flask, at least in this point. Then coming to the template that both of these frameworks use. Well, of course, as we already told you, the templating engine for Flask is Ginger 2, right? It is based, Ginger 2 is actually in itself is a library. The templating engine is based on Django's templating engine. Django comes built in with its own template engine, and to make sure that Flask is faster and more effective than Django, what people did is they separated out the functionality and they use Ginger 2 as a separate library rather than making Flask the heavyweight library that it is not, right? Flask is a very lightweight library as we discussed, and its lightness comes from the fact that we are actually using these other libraries in support of that. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Well, that's not a state for comparison, because at the end of the day, doing this makes Flask really faster. But if you're a person who's learning from scratch where you have a template engine ready to go, in many cases, Django can be seen as advantageous as well there, okay? So Coming to the third point talks about visual debugging. Now, visual debugging becomes very, very important for you to not just look at a couple of lines of code aimlessly to try to figure out what went wrong, but if you have any sort of capabilities where it's highlighting where something went wrong, where it is giving you some sort of a visual cue to tell you that something is either right or wrong, right? This functionality, trust me, can be implemented both in Flask and Django, just for the fact that in Flask it does not have any native support. As Flask itself, it does not provide any support for that, but Django does provide support for visual debugging. Is this a downside? No, it can still be implemented in a very different way, which still works, and sometimes it seems to be work better than what Django can provide. Because again, you might have already seen, right? A lot of third-party accessories to your cars and bikes may give it a more flashy appearance and may make it look a bit better. That's the same case with respect to Flask here as well. Coming to the fourth point, which is development styles. Now, development styles are really, really interesting for you guys to understand and analyze, because here what the advantage that Flask does is Flask gives you a wide variety of tools and techniques to develop app. It's not saying that you have to follow only one way, you have to follow only one track, use only one tool, use only one method to work. Not really. Flask is giving you the biggest advantage in terms of, workable freedom to create your application. This is where Django has a downside. Django's workflow is actually considered to be very monolithic. It's only one way of how you can approach things, attack things, and solve the problems. In some ways, if you are looking for that kind of a simplicity, and if you're looking for that kind of non-complexity, another word for simplicity. If you're trying to work on that path, yes, Django is going to be a better flavor for you to go take a look at. But if you want that extra freedom, trust me, when you're a web application developer, this is exactly what you require. Any tool and technique that's given to you, it's almost like you accept it as gifts, because at the end of the day, you will use it somewhere down the line. It will help you, and without it, you'll be wondering down the line saying, oh, what would I have done if it weren't for that? That thought is very profound, and Flask again trumps Django in that particular point there. Coming to development styles. Development styles is where, again, this is, when you take it as a comparison point, there's no winner in this point, because Flask, again, is built for a very different purpose. Flask is built for rapid prototyping and rapid development. What I mean by rapid prototyping is that you have a concept in your mind, you have an idea in your mind, and you want to take that concept and idea, write and create a product as soon as possible. You want to make sure that your prototype, your working idea of your project, it went from your idea to something in Python. The process of taking your idea into a ready-made product makes very easy in terms of Flask, because it is giving you every push that it can from the back end to make sure you have these capabilities that makes it very easy, right? But then let's take a look at the story of Django here, because Django was not built for rapid prototyping. Django was not built to take your idea and rush it into a product. And of course, it's not the final product. You'll be working on it. But here, Django was built to take it easy. It was built to make sure that you have a structured, slow, one way of how you can work with your web application requirements. But sometimes now I know there can be some of you all who are watching this course who are hardcore Django users, and you might be saying, oh, not really, we have multiple tools and techniques and methodologies to use. Exactly my point here. Just like how Flask overcomes certain disadvantages it has in terms of Django, Django also does overcome certain disadvantages it has in terms of what Flask can provide as well, right? So every single time it's a fight of these web frameworks, and each of the time that the winner basically is us as developers, because we get better products that we can use. Flask makes it more and more and more easier to work with, and Django sees that, and even they bring more functionality, more tools, and they make it even more easier to work with, right? So who's winning at the end of the day? It's we as developers who are finding the most fun ways to work with these tools and make our tasks easy, right? Fantastic, guys. With that, we have completed a small comparison with our Django versus Flask section. We take a look at the applications of Flask. So coming to the section where we are discussing the applications of Flask, again, this is a section where I definitely don't want to get myself, where I don't want to get carried away, because at the end of the day, there are so many applications, there are so many situations, scenarios, everything that we can talk about. But one thing you want to understand is that I've tried to condense all of these into 1 or 2 slides to showcase to you, saying, hey, everyone does use Flask to a good extent, right? Now, you might have heard of this social media website, even though it might not be as popular as other sites. Trust me, it's extremely popular. It's called Pinterest, right? Pinterest is where you go to check out these photos, these pins, as they call it, and whatnot. And it's one of the really big social media sites out there in today's world. And one of the interesting facts is that the creator of Pinterest actually shared, saying that, hey, this was actually built using the Flask framework. We used Flask to build a good amount of Pinterest. And that is really amazing, right? You can open up a new tab right now and open Pinterest, and you will be fascinated with how beautiful that social media is, how beautiful that app is, and it gives you a lot of creative freedom to even analyze and understand what might have gone into building that tool, right? If that was interesting, take a look at the second point, right? When the US elections happened, the presidential elections in the year 2012 happened, Barack Obama's entire 2012 campaign was actually the website that he had for his campaigning. It used a lot of Flask as its main web development framework, right? So right from you tagging and seeing a couple of memes on social media all the way to a presidential candidate who is, fighting for office, at the end of the day is using the same web development framework. So it should show you the massive jump around wherein you can go from domain to domain to domain. Even in healthcare, if you have any healthcare apps on your phone, open it up. I bet there will be something which uses all of these web development frameworks we're discussing, right? Fantastic. Now, to all of our international viewers, if you're in the United States of America, I don't know where else, Lyft is very popular, but Lyft is a very, very popular ride-sharing app, just like how we have multiple apps here in India as well. The fact is that these ride-sharing apps also make use of a lot of frameworks to work, but mainly all these frameworks still have to talk to your web development framework that's out there, which is basically Flask, right? So be it Pinterest, be it Barack Obama's campaign, or be it Lyft, or the thousands of other clients that there are who use Flask, you have to understand that these are some of the companies that make use of this really powerful framework, right? Companies such as Red Hat, Netflix, Samsung, Patreon, Uber, Airbnb, Nginx. Nginx is basically a load balancing software that's very popular. You have Teradata, you have Mozilla Firefox. Ladies and gentlemen, even as a client side website, Mozilla will also make use of Flask to a good extent. What you see on your screen right now is trillions and trillions of dollars worth of business. We're not talking millions, we're not talking billions. Right now we're in the T League, we're in the trillionaire league here. And if all of these guys say, hey, we use Flask and we love using Flask to a good degree, and that it is helping our business grow to a good extent, you can take it from the trillionaires that for sure that this app, this development framework that we are trying to discuss is definitely adding a lot of positive value to all the domains and companies it's a part of, right? Very important for you to know. And then once we go on to discuss the applications of Flask, we have to definitely come to a section wherein we'll take a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of the framework as well, right? Now, in this section, we can quickly take a look at a couple of advantages, and definitely you have to understand that the advantages always outweigh the disadvantages, but there are one or two disadvantages which is very important for you to know. We're going to be discussing that as well. First advantage, of course, the first point has to be rapid prototyping, because rapid prototyping is what everyone in the world today are after, and Flask is providing that on a silver platter. Why do you think people will say no to that, right? And then after rapid prototyping, the second point says that overall code base is comparatively simpler and smaller. If you are a programmer, if you're a developer, you should be smiling at this point of time, because knowing that you can have a same application, a really powerful application with really less code, should make you really happy. And it doesn't mean that if your code is less, it gets complex. Not really. That's because you're using the magic of Python to work with, right? Python never gets really complex to work with. At least it has never for me or a couple of thousands of other developers who share the same opinion. But yes, it's important. The next advantage is that you can build highly scalable, complex projects. Now, it is very, very easy for you to think and assume to say, hey, I can build simple projects, fantastic. I can probably build complex projects, but how scalable is it? How do I take a small product that I built using Flask and how do I enlarge it to a point where it's scalable? Today, maybe your website is serving 10 customers. Tomorrow, your website might be serving 10,000 customers every single hour, right? There, you're going to have to require the capability of you have to have scalability, or else when you have 10,000 customers a day, your entire thing is going to crash and you have to sit and write another application again. Flask will give you the advantage of, removing all of that headache away. Now, the next biggest thing is for the fact that database integration is actually very simple and very straightforward in the terms of Flask, because again, there is so much data that's required for the app itself to work, and then there's user data that comes in, then there's the data for the server itself to work, then there's data for the server to talk to your client. There has to be certain way to ascertain that the client is the actual client, so there's certain information with respect to authorization data, right? There's a million types of data that has to be stored in these databases, and making your database talk to your server and your client is what the challenge that exists. Even though it sounds like a very simple challenge, sometimes it can get complex, but in the case of Flask, this entire process is very simple and straightforward for your usage. Right? Fantastic. There are a couple of more advantages that we have to discuss. First of all, Flask, since it uses other external libraries to work really fully and to give its extensibility, it as a library has a very small core, and yet at the same time, it is so powerful and it's so intense to work with, right? And then another approach that you might be seeing in today's world is something called minimalism, as in smaller the better, lesser the better. Well, developers at Flask actually have used this approach in creating the tool itself for you to create better apps, because at the end of the day, if you are given like a million tools, million techniques and a ton of different things, you will rather be confused and you will be ambiguous to understand and figure out what to be used and all of that. But if I say, hey, this is exactly what you would need to build something like that, straightforward, you go there, you pick it up, you build your app, good to go, right? That approach is very much seen here. And then when you take a look at a lot of documentation that's available, any framework, let me tell you, if you're into data science, if you're into data analysis, you're into big data, you're into any domain that uses a bit of Python out there, all of these libraries, most of them are open source. They're free to use, amazing to work with. At the same time, they are backed by a very, very, very big community of talented, really talented, extremely talented developers and experts, right? So all these experts, they write down documents to make sure that you can go on to use the tools easily. They can give you tutorials, they can give you tips, they can give you techniques, they can give you a lot of workarounds, they can give you a ton of different insights about the frameworks, because those are the guys who have written the damn framework. Right? So at this moment of time, I have intense respect to all of these open source contributors, all of these communities out there, and everyone who's making this, a very, very interesting web development framework for all of us. Now, again, I'm definitely taking these couple of seconds here to credit all of these community members, and you will understand once you start working with these applications, right? There will come a point in time where you will start appreciating all the hard work they do, because their hard work translates to you being easy at your own work to creating the application. Right? Now, at the end of the day, it's not really all bells and whistles. Every advantage comes with a minute disadvantage, and we definitely have one or two disadvantages that you have to take a look at. Now, learning Flask is a very, it's a very good process. It's an amazing process. You get to learn a lot in a short amount of time. But the advantage there sort of peaks out, because at the end of the day, when you have to work on a really complex project, you have to have a lot of previous experiences working on simpler projects to actually set up an environment that's required for a larger project to work with, right? Now, it's not like anyone can go about working with a really complex project with just 1 or 2 days of training. Never happens, right? So this is slightly disadvantageous, because you might feel like Flask becomes very complex to use, but it not really is very complex. It's just that the domain itself is providing that level of complexity and challenge that you have to solve, right? And then when you're working on complex projects, maintaining your complex projects will actually get complex regardless of any library that you use. Unfortunately, in this case, maintenance becomes slightly a task if you're working with Flask as well. And compared to Django, when you take a look at it, Flask does not provide any sort of login mechanism built in, any sort of authentication where you can create yourself, where you can register, create an account, log in, log out, do anything, right? It doesn't come built in. You don't have anything that can give you all of that. If you want login functionality, you have to sit and write. Of course, there's multiple templates available out there, but you'll have to do something yourself. It doesn't come built in with Flask. You can still get the same functionality, or you can get better functionality out there, but in this case, you just have to work a bit for it, right? That again can be seen as a small disadvantage. And then when you take a look at the last point, it says migration of apps can be very difficult. Yes, migration of apps can sometimes be very difficult, because in this case where you might have used Flask to work with your app, maybe down the line you say, okay, maybe I have exhausted all the capabilities that Flask can give me. Now I want to jump ship to something else. then it becomes very difficult for you to move your entire application from Flask to something else like Django. It's not a copy paste, it's not a drag and drop, it's months and months and months of hard work, I'm very sure, right? So that migration can be seen as very difficult. Of course, I don't blame Flask for this, because whenever there's a web development framework out there, no one expects their clients to be leaving and ensuring that they can leave, right? Every single product, every single developer out there ensures that they do everything. They focus their attention on keeping you into their product, into their system, into their ecosystem, right? So migration is difficult because migration is you walking away from Flask, and that can slightly be disadvantage. Yes, it can be better to improve a lot of things with respect to customers, but the way it is the way it is, right? Well, with this, guys, we have discussed a ton of different things with respect to Flask. You've come to the end of this course at this moment. Quickly summarize everything we have learned. We started this course by taking an introduction to understanding what web frameworks are. We went right to the absolute basics. We took a look at web frameworks. Eventually, after understanding what web frameworks are, why are they important, where have you used, I gave you an ample amount of examples to help you understand that. We dived right into the heart of understanding what Flask is, why do we require it, where it is used, what it is good at, what it is not good at. And we had a section where we had to deep dive into Flask to take a look at it. We showed you how you can go about installing Flask and working with it, even verifying the installation as well. After that particular section, we ensured to take a look at understanding many things with respect to how you can, how easy it is to integrate a database with respect to Flask, how is debugging done, and we also compared Flask with respect to another king, another giant in the world of web development, which is Django, right? So you saw 5 or 6 points where at the end, I definitely say that the fight was very much, it stopped there was no clear winner, because again, you can implement each other's functionality using third-party tools. One tool can do something better than the other. So again, comparing apples and oranges doesn't make sense, but that kind of a clarity is definitely required for you guys as beginners, as starters in the domain, right? Now, once we had the comparison, we dived right into the heart to take a look at the various applications that are there out of Flask. You saw that Flask is being used by companies who are absolute giants in the world today. And after that, we also ensured to take a look at a section where we discuss the advantages and disadvantages of Flask as well, right? So that is a section which will showcase to you all the good that Flask brings, and 1 or 2 disadvantages. Definitely something that you should know. It's very important for you to understand the disadvantages, because you will get to know at any point of time in the future if Flask will be the right tool for you or not at that moment of time, right? So guys, all in all, we definitely covered a lot of stuff about Flask, which will definitely give you a very good introduction, very good foundation for you to build on your Flask journey, right? So guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Anirudh Rao, and I wish you all have a very nice day ahead.
So as all of you know, model deployment is the application of a model which you're making, right? Your job actually doesn't end when you have built the model. Building the model is one part of the entire data modeling exercise, wherein you have pre-processed the data, you have looked at the data, you have tried extracting out the insights which are available on the training data set, and based on those insights, you have built a model. But the entire exercise really doesn't end by just building the model. The key is for deploying the model and looking at how your model really performs on an unseen data set. Now, what really is done as far as the model deployment is concerned, what we require is a graphical user interface, right? Now, this graphical user interface could be developed either using a platform like Java or .NET or any other platform which an organization already has, or it could be built by using the simple HTML pages. What I'll be showing you today are the HTML way of deployment, wherein I have built some basic HTML pages. So my idea was not to create some fancy stuff as far as those HTML pages are concerned. In fact, I have not used too much of the style sheets as well, in case if all of you are aware about how the HTML pages are being made. So the user inputs are taken through the graphical user interface, which is either built on the platform which is already available in the organization. As I said, either a Java or a .NET. or if the organization has deployed an enterprise-wide application like the SAP, then there are some inbuilt packages which are available which allows you to create those user interface. So ideally speaking, the key requirement for a model to be deployed is get those user interface, right? Why we require these user interfaces? Because through this interface is what we will take the user input. What are these user inputs? These user inputs are related to the features or the variables which were available in the training data set, and using those features we have built the model. Okay, so what you would have seen till now is there is a train, there is a test which you created, and we keep saying that test has to be exactly the same as a train. So using a test data set, we actually validate the model which you have built. Now, this graphical user interface will allow you to test the model on an unseen data set. Why we call it as an unseen data set? Because this is the data which a user would be entering it now. As an example, let's assume you have built a application to find the whether somebody would default on the loan or not. If I enter into the bank and I fill in the application saying that I want to apply for a loan, then while I am filling up the application, there are certain user inputs which I am providing. These user inputs are taken by the bank and they are given as an input to the model, which will tell me what is the probability that I as a user will default on the loan. Okay, so because I am the new user who is entering into the bank, I'm the new user who is filling up the application form. That's why my data is known as an unseen data set. Whereas the test data on which you test the model is something which is already given it to you. It's a historical data, instances already have. Okay, so this is the fundamental difference. Now there are some other ways of also getting the user interface or getting the user information, which is like an auto-generated text, suggestion box, Facebook auto tag. I'm sure all of you would be aware about it, wherein by default Facebook allows you to mark the picture which you have liked it. So there is an auto tag which is by default, which is enabled. The idea was collect this auto tag or collect this information and use this as an input for predicting it or for giving a suggestion to a user saying you have tagged a photo of this kind. Okay, so either you have a user interface available to collect the user input for an unseen data set, or there are certain applications which are giving you some default options through which the data gets collected. The idea is to collect the data. Okay. Now, what are the key features of a model deployment architecture? First is the modularity. Now, why we say modularity is a key for a model deployment and specifically the pre-processing steps is because certain times the requirement is not just limited to doing a prediction from the data which is available. And I'm sure you would have seen it in the modules. Sometimes we just want to extract the insight which is available, right? So sometimes even the EDA or the pre-processing which we have done on the data set is important. So maybe the pre-processing which has been done on the trained data is something which we want to see on an unseen data set as well, right? This is one example wherein we say that modularity of the way the model has been created is very important. Reproducibility, which means my model deployment architecture which I'm creating should be backward and forward compatible. People from the software background would be able to appreciate the fact that what is a backward and forward compatibility. If there are some changes which have happened in the platform which we are using from a deployment perspective, then that platform should be compatible to the application which were deployed on the previous ones, right? Scalability. Now, this is probably a key requirement whenever we have the application being deployed on a at an enterprise level, and to ensure that the application which is deployed is scalable and it allows multiple users to be collecting the input or multiple user input to be collected through the interface. People have moved on to a deployment on a cloud, and what we also would be looking at is the cloud deployment, but what we'll be using is a demo version of that. Okay. Extensibility, which means if there are certain additional tasks which needs to be done, why from where do we have these additional tasks as far as the model development is concerned? So if let's assume if there is a new data set which has come in, and this new data set talks about certain features which were not collected earlier, and we are rebuilding the model taking those features into an account, then what we need to ensure is that the model which we have built and deployed should be extensible. It's not that we have to probably get into an exercise of doing a deployment from a scratch. Okay. The ability to test the variation between different model versions. So what I will not be able to show you right now is in terms of how do we compare different models which have been deployed, but I'll show you on the cloud platform that how this version control is managed, and whenever we have different models being available, every model has a life, right? So let's assume there is a model which was deployed in an organization for 3 months, and maybe the model is not giving the required output. Sometimes we just go back and look at the previous version which was deployed. Now that previous version could be related to certain different pre-processing steps which were done, or a different kind of features which are available on the dataset. So the ability for the model deployment architecture to be able to manage these versions and provide an option to the organization to be able to test the model on different versions is okay. So if you really look at this in a complete way, then modularity, reproducibility, scalability, extensibility, and testing. If all of you are from the software deployment background, you'll appreciate that most of these key features, these are the key requirement of any software which you deploy. And when we are actually deploying a model, it is in a very broad way, we can say it's like a deployment of a software, right? So that's why we are able to see that there is a strong relationship between the architecture requirement, what we see here for a model deployment, and when we compare it back to any software development. Automation, this is eliminating the manual tasks. The case study, as I said, this is a case study which I would be using it. This is to predict the salary. Just 2 minutes we'll spend on what the data set is. WHO is a specialized agency of the UN which is concerned with the world population health. Based upon the various parameters, WHO allocates budget for various areas to conduct various campaign initiatives to improve healthcare. Annual salary is an important variable which is considered to decide budget to be allocated for an area. Okay. Now this is the data which we have it. I'll quickly move on to the model which was created. I will not spend time in terms of discussing how the model was created. So what I have done is for this data set, which has the variables like age, work class, sampling weight, education number of years, marital status, occupation, relationship, race, sex, capital gain, loss, working hours, native country, salary. I have created an HTML page to collect the user input for all the variables which are independent. So in this data set, all these variables are independent, and based on these variables, we are expected to predict the salary. Salary is available as a binary value which is less than equal to 50K or greater than 50K. The objective of this data set is based on these independent variables, you are expected to predict whether the salary would be less than equal to 50K or it will be greater than 50K. So all these variables will work as an independent variable. This is a dependent variable. As the dependent variable class is binary, we are using logistic as one of the types. Now, assuming I have built the model. So the model is ready with me. Now, how do I go ahead and do the deployment using a Flask as an environment? What is Flask? Flask is a web framework that provides library to build lightweight web application in Python. This is based on WSGI toolkit. What is WSGI? WSGI stands for a Web Server Gateway Interface, which is a standard for Python web application development. and it is using Jinja 2 template engine. What is Jinja? Is a web template engine to render the dynamic web pages, right? What is a dynamic web page? Which allows you to take the input and based on the input, the page gets rendered. What is rendering? Rendering means that the page gets processed. Okay. Flask requires 2.7 or higher version. Now, what are the steps for doing a deployment? The first step is you have to create a pickle of the model. What is a pickle? Now, if you remember in the last couple of slides back, I showed you that for a model to be deployed, we create a executable jar file, and that jar file we deploy in an environment. Okay? Similar to that executable jar file, what I am creating here is a pickle. Okay? In a very broad way, you can assume pickling is a process wherein the model which you have created, you are converting that into an object file. Why we are trying to do that? We are trying to do that so that I can use this file for the deployment. Okay. The file which you create has an extension as .pkl. The library or the package which you require in Python for creating a pickle is in pickle, right? So what I have done here is I can show you the code. We have imported the library pickle and I am opening a file, right? I'm opening a blank file in a write mode, which I'm calling it as adult_flask.pkl. And then in this file, which I have created, I have dumped the model, right? This is the model which I have created, which is using a logistic. This is the file which I have created, right? So the model is dumped into this file. Now to find out whether the dumped file or the PKL file which I have created is working fine or not, I have loaded this PKL file and did a test on the test data set to find out whether the model which I created is giving me the same result through a PKL file and through the model. Okay, I'll just repeat this step which I get. So the first thing which we do from a model deployment perspective is create a pickle file. What is a pickle file? A file which has an extension as .pkl, which is very similar to an object file which we created. How do I create a pickle file? We have to import the library pickle. If you already have not installed it, I'm sure you know it. You have to say pip install the file name. Create a blank file in a write mode. Ensure that the extension of the file is .pkl. And then the model which you have created, dump that model into the file which you have created. Once you have dumped the model, please check whether the PKL file is giving you the same result as the model. Once you're sure about it, then what you have is an adult_flask.pkl file available, which is nothing but a model ready for a deployment. Okay, so this is what is step number 1. What is the step number 2? You have to create a user interface file for getting the user inputs or for looking into the unseen data set, right? Now, as I told you, there are multiple ways in which you can create it. You can have a Java application being developed. You can use a .NET environment. You can use any other application front end which is available for the enterprise-wide application like SAP as an ERP. Or you can use an HTML editor to create the HTML pages. Now, there are a lot of options which are available for creating an HTML pages. You can use the CSS for doing a style sheets and all. I have created very simple HTML pages using Notepad as an editor. Okay, so this is the file which I have created as an HTML file. I have used Notepad as an editor. The objective was just to ensure that I'm able to get the user input. That is the reason I've just created a very simple file. Now, this is the way the HTML file looks like. People who are comfortable with the HTML, they would be able to look into it. Otherwise, I'll just explain it to you. You have broad divisions of an HTML file. The first is a header. The second is the user input which you're trying to take it, right? Now, these options are available for a drop down kind of a list. So there are multiple ways in which you can take an input. You can allow user to enter the input, or you can allow user to select from the available input. Another file which I have created, although it was not mandatory, is a result file. Okay, I can have the prediction result being displayed on the same HTML file, but I have intentionally created a separate file as a result file just to show you that you can have a separate file as a result file, because normally in an organization you do not get to see the result on the same page, right? Otherwise there was no restriction. I could just add this part of the code, which is an HTML code, onto the same input file which I have created. Okay, so the step number 2 is create a user interface. Herein I've said create an HTML page because I am using the HTML page as a user interface, right? Okay. Step number 3, create a file with an extension .py using Python editor like Jupyter Notebook. Now, what I have created here is a file which is known as app.py. This is the main file which is being looked by the Flask. Okay, let's look at it, what the file has. These are two standard libraries which I have seen, NumPy, Pandas. I am using a Flask, right? This is a Flask as a package which I have loaded using a pip. Once it is loaded, I'm using it. So I'm using a Flask and I'm using a request render template. Okay. Now, what is request render template? These two are used by the HTML pages, right? I'm sure you would have seen I'm using the word rendering. Rendering actually means processing the HTML page which you have. The first line which you write here is an app, right? So app is equal to Flask. This is here you are initializing the Flask. Okay. The second part of the text is, I'll probably explain it through here. Okay. These are the libraries you have it. This is where you initialize the Flask. The next part is you define from where you are getting the user input, right? Herein I am getting the input through a file which I have created as an HTML, which is adult.html. The fourth block of the code is talking about the model which you have created. Okay, and herein I am using adult flask.pkl. This is the file which I have created using a Pickle library, and this is what I define it, which we call it as a prediction function, which means those user input which I am getting, from where they will be processed. The next part which I am giving is a output page. Okay. Now, if this was not a separate page, I would have given the block or the portion which was available in the first HTML file, but because I have created a separate page as a result, and that's what I'm mentioning. Okay, this is the main function of a .py file, and this is from where the program really starts. Okay, this is the first function which gets executed by the Flask. Now let's just go back and look at this one more time. So these are the libraries. This is where I'm initializing the Flask. This is where I'm giving an input, which is a .html file. This is the .pkl file of the model. This is the output part of it. And this is the main function, which will get executed whenever I will initiate the, or whenever I execute this app.py. Okay. So, 3-step process for doing a deployment. Let's just quickly go back and look at it one more time. Step 1, create a Pickle file. Step 2, create a user interface. Step 3, create a file by the extension .py, and this is what the format of the file should be. Okay. Now, you have to be very careful when you are creating a structure. What I have done here is I have created a folder by the name Flask. I'll just show it to you. Okay, this is the folder which I have by the name Flask. Under that, I have created another directory by the name templates, right, which has these two HTML files. The main folder which I have is a Flask. Under that, I have another subfolder by the name templates, which has adult HTML and result HTML. At the same level, where I've created a templates, I have these two files being stored: adult_flask.pkl and app.py. Okay, what is this is the model file which I have it, and this is the .py file which I created. You just go back and look at it. I have adult flask.pkl and app.py. This is mandatory that you should have a structure like this. Now, to execute this file, what we'll do is we'll go on to the Anaconda prompt. Herein I am at the Anaconda prompt. I will go to the library. I'll go to the directory which I have created. So I'm saying cd c:\gl class. I reach the Flask. Once I am at the directory from where I have to execute the file, I'll say python app.py. Okay. Once I say python app.py, this is a lazy loading. Lazy loading means in the software industry or in the web pages, whenever you see a lazy loading means these are not loaded automatically. Whenever you request for it, it loads it. So this command will take another couple of 2-3 minutes, and then it will show you a URL, which is this URL. This is a URL for running the app on a local host. What is a local host? Which means running it on your machine. So once you do python app.py, you copy this URL, paste it here, and what you get is a form. Now, this is the input HTML form which I have created. Let me just enter some values. So let's assume age is, let me enter age is 40 years. Working class is, these are the drop down options which are available. Let me say local. Education is 12th standard. Marital status is married. Occupation is, let's say, a craft repair. Relationship is other relative. Race, gender as a female. Capital gain, let's assume I entered some value 999. Capital loss, hours per week 40. Native country, let's say Canada, and I say submit. Now what it is doing it is executing the model, doing a processing, and it will take me to the second page, which is a result page, when it will show me an output of a prediction which says income less than 50K. This is how I deploy a model using Flask, and I'm able to get a URL which I'm able to run on my local machine. Now, I'm sure you would have figured out that this is a URL which I have created, which I'm able to run only on my local machine. So if I have to give this out to multiple users, if I have to give this out to multiple people, then it is not feasible, right? Unless I share my desktop and things like that. But practically, it is not feasible. So what we will do now is, so this Flask as a deployment is good enough, and I have created some model, and I want to show this as a demo, or I want to just test this as a model. How will it look like when it will actually get deployed? Flask is a good environment to work on. Now these are different ways in which the model could be deployed. The way you need to read the table is the column really represents the different ways in which the model could be deployed. Each row represents that for each type of a model deployment, what are we using for a training perspective? How does a prediction happens? How the prediction results are delivered? What is the latency for prediction? And what is the system management difficulty? Right? So each row represents the values or the outcome of each model deployment against these parameters. Fair enough? The first one, which we call it as a REST API, and what we'll just see in the next slide is what is exactly is a REST. Application programming interface is what we use for doing a deployment of a model. Now, in this case, what is assumed is that you already have made the model, and this model has been made based on the data set which is available as historical data, and that's why we're calling it as a batch. Okay, which means the train data which was used to build the model was available in a batch. What we do as a prediction is on the fly, which means the moment I enter the input, I'm able to get the output as a predicted value. And this is what we will see today. When I enter the input using the HTML user interface, we'll be able to see the output as a predicted output. The prediction results delivery, this again happens through a REST API. Latency for prediction, which means how much delay is there from the time when I take the user input to the time when I get the output back is so. System management difficulty is also so. When we move on to different patterns, then I'll probably explain you why we say the system management difficulty is so. Pattern 2 of a model deployment is when you have the data set being used for training is a batch. Prediction also happens in a batch, which means it's not that the user interface or the user inputs I have collected and I'm able to get the output immediately. In this case, there is a database which is created, which means I keep entering the input. So let's just go back to the loan application example. Let's assume there are 50 customers who have walked in today and they wanted to apply for a loan, right? So there are 50 applications which a bank has for a day. Bank will keep entering the details of the values or the parameters that are available in the application, and these features or these variables are stored in a DB. Now, what will happen is maybe the batch frequency which is defined, maybe at the end of a day, maybe the next day, maybe in middle of the day, all these input records which are available in a shared DB. And why we call it a shared DB? Because it's the same data set structure which has been used for training the model is where we are actually keeping the new records which come in. And through this DB, this DB is the new records which have been entered in the DB are given as an input to the model which is available, and the output which you get is again stored in the DB. So that's why we call it as a batch. Okay, I'll just repeat it one more time. So you have the data set which is available as a historical data, the normal data set or a CSV file which you have seen it. For a prediction or for the new entries which are happening, they are again stored in kind of a .csv file, right? They are again stored as a data set. Now these records which have been stored as the new records which are yet to be predicted are given as an input to the training set, and what you get as an output is the prediction value. These predicted values are again stored back in the data set which you can go and refer it. So let's assume there are 50 applications which have come in. These 50 or a batch of these 50 application inputs will be given to the model. The output would be again stored back in the data set or in the database or in a CSV file, and which will say record number 1. So for Anjana, the loan is rejected. For Ritesh, loan is approved, something like that, right? So that's why we call it as a batch. It happens through the shared DB. Latency for prediction is very high because this is a batch processing, right? So it's not that you're able to immediately see the result. Based on the frequency you define it for a batch execution is what it takes. System management difficulty is easy because you have everything available in a offline kind of an environment, right? You have the model which is available as an offline. You have the data set which is getting created from a prediction perspective is also kind of an offline. So it's the easy one. Pattern 3 is a streaming. Okay, and what is a streaming? In this case, what we are trying to do is we are actually making a change in the model when a new data set comes in. So let's assume, and this is the streaming is a platform which is used by all the e-commerce or a marketing kind of an industry. What they really do is, let's assume there is a model which was created on the data set which was available till yesterday, right? The new records which come in, the new records will predict based on the model which was created as of yesterday, but these new records will immediately become part of the trained data set, which means now the value which I have predicted, right, is what will be used as a given value, and even the model building is getting changed every time, right? So you have the training being done as a streaming, the prediction being done as a streaming. Latency obviously is very low. It's a very difficult environment to manage, because normally what we have is we have a the architecture or the hardware which is available on which the model has been built. We have a separate hardware or a separate a set of environment which is available on which we deploy the model. Now herein, because the new record which have come in as a stream is again being used for training the model, you have to be absolutely clear in terms of how the environment has been managed. Okay, so this is the most difficult. Now if you go back, as I said, when you are doing an interface through an API, the system management difficulty is so because in this case the hardware which is being used, there is no separate, if I can use a word, a demarcation of saying that this is the separate environment which has been available from a training perspective or from a model building, and this is a separate environment from a prediction perspective. Pattern 4, which is more used for our mobile applications. Again, the training is streaming, the prediction happen on the fly. This is using an API on the mobile. Latency is low, and the system management difficulty is so. Okay. So what is the REST? This is a representationable state transfer API, which is an API, as I said, is an application programming interface, which is used to integrate the user input which you are taking with the available enterprise application. On-demand analysis by GUI, which is a drag and drop prediction interface, which allows user to get prediction when they need them. Okay, this is whenever you want it. It's like giving a input now, and that's what we'll do. We'll enter the values on an HTML pages. Whenever we enter the values, we just press the submit and we'll get the prediction out. Scoring code export, which is model is available as an executable jar file or as a Java source code and can be deployed anywhere where Java, right? Something on the similar lines is what we'll be using on a Flask environment. So the key requirement for a model to be able to execute without the necessary support of the libraries, what the one which we have used in the Python is to ensure that I bundle the libraries in such a way that machine is able to understand, right? And this is what we call it as an object file. So once you have created something which a machine can understand, then you don't require those supporting libraries because they are bundled along with the object which has been. Okay. Standalone scoring engine, which is a separate staging and a protection environment so that the model can be tested and implemented in a stable, isolated way. Some more deployment options which you have is a cloud deployment and a big data environment. Cloud deployment, as I said, it has become almost a necessity now, looking at the scalability which you require from for an organization and the way the hardware is changing. People, they do not really want to invest on this as an asset, and hence they buy the cloud. They have the space available in a cloud, and nowadays the industry has also provided you a platform which is available as a service. Okay. So when I'm talking about, and that's what I'll probably touch when we move on to the next one. So when I'm talking about Heroku as a platform, this is nothing but a platform which is available as a service on a cloud environment. Okay. Now, when I was talking about the clouds, there are multiple options which are available for an organization to get into a cloud deployment. One is you have your own private cloud which is available, right? Private cloud means this is a cloud which has the security restricted to an organization, and on that private cloud you can have a platform which is available, right? And then you deploy it. The second option is, as I said, the organizations have already created a platform. So Heroku is such kind of a platform. So Heroku as a platform is available as a PaaS, which is platform as a service, PaaS. So what you need to do is, this is a free environment. You can create your own login and you can use this environment to do a model deployment. There are paid versions of Heroku which is also available. The free version has certain restrictions in terms of number of users who can provide a user interface, or number of users who can access the application, number of applications that you can deploy. But if you are looking at a demo kind of an application, if you are looking for a small project to be deployed, you can use these platforms as a service, right? So from a cloud deployment, you have an option of buying a cloud, creating your own environment, or you have an option of using the service as a platform which is available on the cloud. And that's what we'll use as a Heroku. Okay. So two things which we'll do. One is we will look at a Flask deployment and we will look at a Heroku deployment. The case study, as I said, this is a case study which I would be using it. This is to predict the salary. Just 2 minutes we'll spend on what the data set is. WHO is a specialized agency of the UN which is concerned with the world population health. Based upon the various parameters, WHO allocates budget for various areas to conduct various campaign initiatives to improve healthcare. Annual salary is an important variable which is considered to decide budget to be allocated for it. Okay. Now this is the data which we have it. I'll quickly move on to the model which was created. I will not spend time in terms of discussing how the model was created. Okay. This is a problem statement you had, and this is a session which probably you would see it or you would have seen it in the logistic. Okay. So what I have done is, for this data set, which has the variables like age, work class, sampling weight, education number of years, marital status, occupation, relationship, race, sex, capital gain, loss, working hours, native country, salary. I have created an HTML page to collect the user input for all the variables which are independent. So in this data set, all these variables are independent, and based on these variables, we are expected to predict the salary. Salary is available as a binary value which is less than equal to 50K or greater than 50. Okay. I'll just repeat one more time. This is a data set which is available in your logistic module as well. The objective of this data set is, based on these independent variables, you are expected to predict whether the salary would be less than equal to 50K or it will be greater than 50K. So all these variables will work as an independent variable. This is a dependent variable. As the dependent variable class is binary, we are using logistic as one of the things. Okay. The application of a model which you're making, right? Your job actually doesn't end when you have built the model. Building the model is one part of the entire data modeling exercise, wherein you have pre-processed the data, you have looked at the data, you have tried extracting out the insights which are available on the training data set, and based on those insights, you have built a model. But the entire exercise really doesn't end by just building the model. The key is for deploying the model and looking at how your model really performs on an unseen data set. Now, what really is done as far as the model deployment is concerned, what we require is a graphical user interface, right? Now, this graphical user interface could be developed either using a platform like Java or .NET or any other platform which an organization already has. or it could be built by using the simple HTML pages. What I'll be showing you today are is the HTML way of deployment, wherein I have built some basic HTML pages. So my idea was not to create some fancy stuff as far as those HTML pages are concerned. In fact, I have not used too much of the style sheets as well, in case if you all of you are aware about how the HTML pages are being made. So the user inputs are taken through the graphical user interface, which is either built on the platform which is already available in the organization. As I said, either a Java or a .NET, or if the organization has deployed an enterprise-wide application like the SAP, then there are some inbuilt packages which are available which allows you to create those user interfaces. So ideally speaking, the key requirement for a model to be deployed is get those user interface, right? Why we require these user interfaces? Because through this interface is what we will take the user input. What are these user inputs? These user inputs are related to the features or the variables which were available in the training data set, and using those features we have built the model. Okay, so what you would have seen till now is there is a train, there is a test which you created, and we keep saying that test has to be exactly the same as a train. So using a test data set, we actually validate the model which you have built. Now, this graphical user interface will allow you to test the model on an unseen data set. Why we call it as an unseen data set? Because this is the data which a user would be entering it now. As an example, let's assume you have built a application to find the whether somebody would default on the loan or not. If I enter into the bank and I fill in the application saying that I want to apply for a loan, then while I am filling up the application, there are certain user inputs which I am providing. These user inputs are taken by the bank and they are given as an input to the model, which will tell me what is the probability that I as a user will default on the loan. Okay. So because I am the new user who is entering into the bank, I'm the new user who is filling up the application form. That's why my data is known as an unseen data set. Whereas the test data on which you test the model is something which is already given it to you. It's a historical data, instance is already happened. Okay. So this is the fundamental difference. Now, there are some other ways of also getting the user interface, getting the user information, which is like an auto-generated text, suggestion box, Facebook auto tag. I'm sure all of you would be aware about it, wherein by default, Facebook allows you to mark the picture which you have liked it. So there is an auto tag which is by default, which is enabled. The idea was collect this auto tag or collect this information and use this as an input for predicting it or for giving a suggestion to a user saying you have tagged a photo of this kind. Okay, so either you have a user interface available to collect the user input for an unseen data set, or there are certain applications which are giving you some default options through which the data gets collected. The idea is to collect the data. Okay. Now, what are the key features of a model deployment architecture? First is the modularity. Now, why we say modularity is a key for a model deployment and specifically the pre-processing steps is because certain times the requirement is not just limited to doing a prediction from the data which is available. And I'm sure you would have seen it in the modules. Sometimes we just want to extract the insight which is available, right? So sometimes even the EDA or the pre-processing which we have done on the data set is important. So maybe the pre-processing which has been done on the trained data is something which we want to see on an unseen data set as well, right? This is one example wherein we say that modularity of the way the model has been created is very important. Reproducibility, which means my model deployment architecture which I'm creating should be backward and forward compatible. People from the software background would be able to appreciate the fact that what is a backward and forward compatibility. if there are some changes which have happened in the platform which we are using from a deployment perspective, then that platform should be compatible to the application which were deployed on the previous one, right? Scalability. Now, this is probably a key requirement whenever we have the application being deployed on a at an enterprise level, and to ensure that the application which is deployed is scalable and it allows multiple users to be collecting the input, or multiple user input to be collected through the interface. People have moved on to a deployment on a cloud, and what we also would be looking at is the cloud deployment, but what we'll be using is a demo version of that. Okay? Extensibility, which means if there are certain additional tasks which needs to be done, why from where do we have these additional tasks as far as the model development is concerned? So if let's assume if there is a new data set which has come in, and this new data set talks about certain features which were not collected earlier, and we are rebuilding the model taking those features into an account, then what we need to ensure is that the model which we have built and deployed should be extensible. It's not that we have to probably get into an exercise of doing a deployment from a scratch. Okay? The ability to test the variation between different model versions. So what I will not be able to show you right now is in terms of how do we compare different models which have been deployed, but I'll show you on the cloud platform that how this version control is managed. And whenever we have different models being available, every model has a life, right? So let's assume there is a model which was deployed in an organization for 3 months, and maybe the model is not giving the required output. Sometimes we just go back and look at the previous version which was deployed. Now that previous version could be related to certain different pre-processing steps which were done, or a different kind of features which were available on the dataset. So the ability for the model deployment architecture to be able to manage these versions and provide an option to the organization to be able to test the model on different versions is a okay. Most of these key features which I've just spoken about, these are the key requirement of any software which you deploy. And when we are actually deploying a model, it is in a very broad way, we can say it's like a deployment of a software, right? So that's why we are able to see that there is a strong relationship between the architecture requirement, what we see here for a model deployment, and when we compare it back to any software development. Automation, this is eliminating the manual tasks. So what is the REST? This is a representational state transfer API, which is an API, as I said, is an application programming interface, which is used to integrate the user input which you are taking with the available enterprise application. On-demand analysis by GUI, which is a drag and drop prediction interface, which allows user to get prediction when they need them. Okay, this is whenever you want it. It's like giving a input now, and that's what we'll do. We'll enter the values on an HTML pages. Whenever we enter the values, we just press the submit and we'll get the prediction out. Scoring code export. The model is available as an executable jar file or as a Java source code, and can be deployed anywhere where Java, right? Something on the similar lines is what we'll be using on a Flask environment. So the key requirement for a model to be able to execute without the necessary support of the libraries, what the one which we have used in the Python is to ensure that I bundle the libraries in such a way that machine is able to understand, right? And this is what we call it as an object file. So once you have created something which a machine can understand, then you don't require those supporting libraries because they are bundled along with the object which has. Okay. Standalone scoring engine, which is a separate staging and a production environment so that the model can be tested and implemented in a stable, isolated way. Some more deployment options which you have is a cloud deployment and a big data environment. Cloud deployment, as I said, it has become almost a necessity now, looking at the scalability which you require from for an organization, and the way the hardware is changing. People, they do not really want to invest on this as an asset. and hence they buy the cloud. They have the space available in a cloud, and nowadays the industry has also provided you a platform which is available as a service. Okay, so when I'm talking about Heroku as a platform, this is nothing but a platform which is available as a service on a cloud environment. Okay, now when I was talking about the clouds, there are multiple options which are available for an organization to get into a cloud deployment. One is you have your own private cloud which is available, right? Private cloud means this is a cloud which has the security restricted to an organization, and on that private cloud you can have a platform which is available, right? And then you deploy it. The second option is, as I said, the organizations have already created a platform. So Heroku is such kind of a platform. So Heroku as a platform is available as a PaaS, which is platform as a service, PaaS. So what you need to do is, this is a free environment. You can create your own login and you can use this environment to do a model deployment. There are paid versions of Heroku which is also available. The free version has certain restrictions in terms of number of users who can provide a user interface, or number of users who can access the application, number of applications which you can deploy. But if you are looking at a demo kind of an application, if you are looking for a small project to be deployed, you can use these platforms as a service, right? So from a cloud deployment, you have an option of buying a cloud, creating your own environment, or you have an option of using the service as a platform which is available on the cloud. And that's what we'll use as a Heroku. Okay. So two things which we'll do. One is we will look at a Flask deployment and we will look at a Heroku deployment. The second part, which is a Heroku. Now what we'll try doing it is, we will try to deploy this in a cloud. We will try to deploy this on a cloud platform, which is Heroku. As I said, Heroku is a platform as a service which enables to deploy, build, run, and operate the application entirely on a cloud. Okay. Now, how does an Heroku platform looks like? This is what the Heroku is. Okay. The first thing which you have to do is, let me just show you the first part of it. Herein I've already logged in. So if I just say Heroku login, this is the first page which you get it, right? Because I'm already logged in, that's why it's giving you this as an option. Otherwise, it will show you login here. Okay. Create a login in Heroku platform. Now, this is a free platform which is available, right? You don't have to pay anything. As I said, this is a simple application. If you want to deploy, you really don't have to pay anything. You can create a login which is free of cost. The first thing which you'll do it, once you've created a login, you have to create a new application, right? For creating a new application, it's very simple. You have to just follow the instruction which Heroku is giving you. What I have done here is I have created an application which I'm calling it as an adult salary prediction. Okay. First time when you create this application, this is a blank application. Now, this application can be deployed in two different ways. You can create a repository on GitHub. Okay. Now, I'll just show you why I'm saying you can use this as a repository. Let me just go back here. Once you are into an application, you select it, you have an option here as a deploy. Okay. Now, once you get into a deploy, these are the three options which it will show you. Which means I can deploy adult salary prediction application, which is blank for the first time when I created it, using a GitHub. Now, what will GitHub do? I would have created a folder like this on a GitHub, right? What is the use of a GitHub? GitHub is an environment which is available if there are multiple developers who are working on it. If all of them can refer to the code which is available in a GitHub and they can work on that code, they can edit the code and all, right? So what Heroku allows you is, if you have an application which has been created by through multiple users, through multiple developers, and assuming the application has been deployed on a GitHub, because GitHub is a very common platform which is being used by all the developers nowadays. So Heroku by default assumes that you have a model or you have the .pkl file along with the remaining user interface is available on a GitHub. So you can actually create an application through the GitHub, or Heroku has a client level interface, right, which is a CLI which is available. Through the CLI, you can actually deploy the application, which is very similar to deploying it through a GitHub, right? Or you can use a CLI application. Now, when you want to use a CLI application, Heroku requires to download a package which is a Git. What is Git? And before I end the session, I'll show you certain links also from where you can get some additional information. What is Git? It is nothing but a version control and software which is available, right? So Heroku by default requires a Git package. So what you need to do is you need to download the Git from Google. So it's simple. You have to just go there, search. I have a Windows environment, so I'll say Git for Windows, and I'll get to see an executable file, right? Once you have created, once you have downloaded the Git and executed it, now you can use an Heroku CLI environment, right? I'll show you the CLI environment right now. GitHub will exactly follow the same path. The difficult part is the CLI, because herein you have to write the commands. Through the GitHub, those commands automatically gets executed. Okay? So the first thing, create a login. Second, create a new application. For a new application, just follow the platform instructions. Third is you download the Git and use the Heroku CLI to deploy the application. Now, what this requires is to create two different files. The first file is a proc file, and there is another file which I'll just show you is a configuration file. Okay. So Heroku platform deployment requires you to create two additional files. One is a proc file and the second is a configuration file. What is the proc file? Proc file requires you to provide this as a command. Gunicon is a web user interface, right? The way you have a Flask, which was a WSGI, which is a web server gateway interface. Similarly, Gunicon is a WSGI environment for Heroku. Okay, so you have to say web Gunicon, and then you have to provide these two arguments, app : app. What is this app? This is the name of the .py file. So remember, what I have created, the file name was app.py. So hence I have provided the name as app here. The second is through which you have initiated the Flask. So if you go back here, this is the name you have given when you have initiated the Flask. So hence my proc file will read app : app. Please remember, this proc file which you will create should necessarily have P as a capital and should not have any extension. It should not have any extension. Even if you have created the file using a notepad, remove the .txt extension from the file. Okay. Third step is you create a configuration file which is known as a requirements.txt. This file necessarily should have an extension as .txt. R is in small case. Now what this file contains is the exact version of the libraries through which you have created the model. Okay. What Heroku needs? As I said, Heroku is a platform, right? For your model to run, when we went onto the Flask, right? When I went onto the Anaconda prompt, this Anaconda prompt already had a Python environment, right? This already had the packages which I required, which is a NumPy, Pandas, or Flask, or Gunicon, or whatever. This already has those packages available. When I'm using Heroku, Heroku is a platform which is available for deploying any kind of an application. So how will Heroku know that what I'm giving it to him as a .pkl file is a Python file which has certain built-in packages which are available. So whatever you have used in the model creation or using the app file, all these libraries you will have to provide it either as a double equal to sign or as a greater than sign, right? So when I say Flask double equal to 1.1.1, which means load the Flask, which is 1.1.1, right? So this configuration file or a requirement file will carry the version of the library package which you have it. How do you know the version? You can go on to the Python and you can figure out the version which you have it, right? So this is the third requirement. You have to create a requirements.txt file. Both these files, which is the prop file and the requirement.txt, should be created in the same directory where you have the main application. So remember, I had the main application in the Flask directory. So I have these two files created there. Then in the step 4, what I will do is I will go on to the Anaconda prompt and I will go on to the directory which I needed, which is a Flask directory, and execute these commands. Okay, I'll just show you these commands which are available on a Heroku platform because we are doing installation using a CLI. These are the commands which you have to execute, right? First, you have to do a Heroku login. I'm already logged in. Then you have to say Heroku git clone -a. This is the name of the application. So adult salary prediction is the name of the application. So that's why in my login, it is by default showing me this is a command. So what I'm doing is I am creating a clone of this application. So what this command does is it actually creates a directory by this name, which will work as a clone. Then I move on to this directory, right? Once I move on to this directory, I'll say git add dot. Git add dot means git, I told you, is a version control software. Git add dot will add all these files which I had in a library before that. So I have an adult salary prediction library which is available here because I have already added. What you see here is it creates exactly the structure which you had in Flask. You have the templates, you have adult flask.pkl, app.py, prop file, requirement.txt, right? And then you say commit. Commit means these are the new files which you should consider for the application. Once you say commit, it will give you a URL which is the name of the application and herokuapp.com. This URL, even you can run it right now on your machine. Okay. So once I go on and type this URL, I'll exactly get the same. So the difference between this and the earlier one which I showed you was the earlier one was locally available. This was deployed on a local host. It was locally available on my machine. This is a URL which anybody can use it. And once you enter the input here, so let me add the values here 40. Let's call this as 12. Married. Let's just leave this here as it is. 999, 88, 66, submit. Okay, so exactly the process is same. It is now executing the model and rendering the input which I have given it, and it will give me the result back onto the result file which I create. Fair enough? So this is how you deploy a model using an Heroku platform. Let's just go back one more time. Create a login, create a new application. If you want to deploy it using a CLI, download a Git, create a file by the name prop file, which will have this as an entry. Create a requirement.txt file, which will have name of all the libraries and the packages which I've used it when I created the model. Or this is basically setting the Python environment, which by default, when you were executing on an Anaconda, you had it. Then you execute these commands, and you will have a URL which can be used by anyone. Okay. These are some references or links which you can use, which will give you a little more information. Please note that these are not the only links which are available, but these are the ones which I thought was good for you to get started on. All these terms or the environment or the platform which you have used, like Unicorn, Flask, Pickle, and okay. So this is how you deploy a model. I hope this was useful.
If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any new update or video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoyed this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, so make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. Make sure to comment on the video for any query or suggestions, and I will respond to your comments.